This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is an internationally acclaimed music artist, especially in the world of jazz. He's an iconic trumpet player, composer, arranger, educator, and author. For over 30 years, he's been a featured trumpet soloist with the legendary Count Basie Orchestra, and for the past 10 years, he's been the orchestra's director. He's a two-time Grammy Award winner, and he's worked with some of the greatest music artists in the world, including Tony Bennett, Lena Horne, Frank Sinatra, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Barbra Streisand, Tito Puente, Wynton Marsalis, Herbie Hancock, Quincy Jones, the Duke Ellington Orchestra, Diana Krall, and dozens more. In 2009, he released his highly acclaimed first solo album entitled Say It Plain, which reached number 3 on the jazz charts. Our guest is widely considered to be the leading authority on the history of jazz trumpet. In 2005, he published his groundbreaking book, The World of Jazz Trumpet, a comprehensive history and practical philosophy, which is the definitive text on the subject. He's a professor at Florida State University, and he gives keynote lectures and seminars around the world. He's also profiled in Scott Yano's groundbreaking book, Trumpet Kings, The Players Who Shaped the Sound of Jazz, which places him right up there with the most important jazz trumpeters in history, from Louis Armstrong to Miles Davis and others. And now he's here to discuss his monumental brand new album entitled The Count Basie Orchestra Swings the Blues. This is an exceptional and unprecedented collection of collaborations with some of the greatest living blues and jazz artists, including George Benson, Shemekia Copeland, Robert Cray, Buddy Guy, Betty LaVette, Bobby Rush, and many more. The album features spectacular versions of blues classics like Stormy Monday, The Midnight Hour, Look What You've Done, Just for a Thrill, and I'm a Woman, alongside new instant classics like Mr. Sips, Let's Have a Good Time, and our guest's inspired fusion of Charlie Patton meets Count Basie in the Patton-Basie Shuffle. The new album celebrates the deep-rooted connection between jazz and blues and illuminates shared roots and reciprocal influence, reminding us that the boundaries between these genres are fluid and heartfelt. The fabulous Count Basie Orchestra continues to carry on the rich musical legacy of Count Basie through their dynamic performances and dedication to the swing jazz tradition. Our guest, as the orchestra's musical director, preserves Count Basie's unmistakable style and ensures that his pioneering contributions to jazz continue to be celebrated and enjoyed by audiences around the world. I'm delighted and deeply honored to welcome the one and only Scotty Barnhart to our show. Scotty, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, man, thank you, Harvey. Beautiful. Thank you. My pleasure to be here, man. My pleasure.
Scotty, you're from Atlanta, Georgia, and your family attended the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. I read that you were christened by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I was christened by him when I was 3 months old, and I was baptized by Daddy King when I was 6. But my family has been at that church for 120 years or so. So we've been intertwined with the King family since about 1904 through his grandfather. So my mother grew up with him. My generation, I grew up with his kids, Dexter, Marty, Bunny. We all grew up together. So it was just one of those things where growing up there was a major influence on how I heard music, how I was really exposed to it, how I identified Count Basie when I first heard it, because I was hearing that at church, you know. So it was a great opportunity for me to, now that I look back on it, to see how lucky I was from a historical perspective. And my mother and father, they knew all of these people. They knew Dr. King, they knew, John Lewis and Julian Bond, all of these people, these civil rights, icons, they knew them. And for me, we were just growing up in the house with, you hear them talk about it and you see them at church. You don't think too much of it. You just go on because it's a part of what you do. But now looking back, man, I was extremely lucky, extremely lucky for that.
Is it true that as a child you first wanted to play the violin?
Yeah. Well, in Atlanta, in the Atlanta school system at that time, this is 1974, when you got to fifth grade, they would simply say, well, if you want to be in a band, then you take this permission slip home and you get your parents to sign it and get whatever instrument you want to play. Well, I saw a kid walking in the hall one day with the violin, and I just stuck with my mind for whatever reason. So I said, well, maybe let me get a violin. So I asked my mom and dad, and said, yeah, we'll get your violin, no problem. So the day came that I knew when I got home from school that day, my mother would be there with the violin. So I went home, and it was September 1974, and I'm sitting there waiting for her to get home. She gets home, she comes down the driveway in the car. She gets out of the car with a smile on her face. She had on a white pantsuit. I still can see it, almost 50 years ago. And she goes around to the trunk. She opens the trunk up, and there's this black instrument case in the middle of the trunk. So I'm expecting a violin. So she opened the case up, and there was a silver trumpet. And it was a beautiful fall day, and the sun hit that silver, man. I never thought about violin another day in my life, man. I've been playing trumpet ever since. And that's a true story. That's how that happened. So years later, I was doing an interview again, and somebody asked me, well, why did your mom get that instead of the violin? So I actually had to call her and ask her because I hadn't really asked before. And she said, oh, well, when I got there to get the violin, there were a whole bunch of other parents there getting their kids, string instruments, violins and all that. And the line was too long. So I went next door to the brass part of the store. There was nobody in line over there. And I went over there and got a trumpet. So So the line was too long, man. That's what made her think, well, let me get out of this line, go to this line. I'm going to get this. I'm going to take that home. And
now that's what you call divine intervention, if ever there was one. Well, as a young trumpet player, who were your major musical influences? Was Wynton Marsalis one of them?
Wynton came when I was 17. But before that, there were Doc Severinsen, because, Doc Severinsen was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. So my parents would allow me to stay up late just to watch the shows so I can hopefully hear Doc or see Doc play. So it was Doc Severinsen, it was Louis Armstrong on TV every once in a while. I see him on television. The great Al Hirt was another one. My father had some 8-track tapes of Al Hirt. And so all of these things were, so I would say Al Hirt, Louis Armstrong, and Doc Severinsen. And then Freddie Hubbard when I was 12. I heard him at the house of our late family friend, Congressman John Lewis. And then about 2 or 3 years after that, well, right around 12, I saw Basie. I saw the orchestra live. So those guys in his trumpet section, Pete Minger, Sonny Cohn, those guys became, my idols because I would see their names on the back of album covers when I would buy them, But when I was 17 is when I saw Wynton, and that just changed everything, man, because he looked to be my age, and playing something. So when I saw him on the Tonight Show, I said, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I just knew when I saw it and heard it, that's what my life's supposed to be. I just knew, So that was April of 1982. Fast forward to July of 1982, I happened to be in Europe on this Jazz Abroad tour. Jazz Abroad used to be an organization that put together high school and college musicians and put them in a big band along with the jazz choir. And you just go to Europe for 3 weeks, playing all over Europe for 3 weeks. I got chosen for that, a band somehow. So we were in London one night, we were in the middle of this tour and we had a night off. And somebody in the group said, well, what shall we do tonight? We got a night off, and they had a newspaper where we see there's a club here. There's somebody named Wynton Marsalis. Oh, let's go see him. They had his name all messed up, So we bought like 30 tickets, man. We go to Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in London, which is still there. I played there many times since then. And there I saw Wynton for the first time. I sat 3 feet away from him for 3 hours, man. And it changed. Man, you talking about, I can't even put it in words what that was like. To see it and hear it, to see them in suits and playing this difficult, elegant music and owning it and having everybody on the edge of the seats wondering what he's going to play next. And the other thing I remember too, which is a really wonderful thing, there were some older gentlemen in the audience, older jazz trumpet players that had come up in the 40s and 50s that they went over to introduce them to. So you could see the reverence that the elders already had for him. They knew that was the guy. They knew he was the next one to sort of take the torch or extend the music on or keep it alive or whatever. And I'm right there feeling all of it. And I knew I was a part of it. I could feel it, So then it was just a matter of trying to figure out what to do. What do I practice on, man? How do I do that? So I remember him telling me, yeah, man, you learn all your scales and technical things like that. And that was July of 1982. And he and I talked from that moment on, even till the day, we just talked to him a week or so ago. We've talked since then. He's played over the phone for me. We've recorded together, toured together. We've been, great friends since then. So his success and what he has been doing since 1980, 81, 82 has been a really real inspiration to me to see the path that I could take musically. And I'm talking about commercially and that, just musically, what I could find out, if I had a little role to play as well as, my generation, our generation, we're in the same generation, trying to, take what the elders gave us and add to it, man. That's what we're still trying to do. They left us, I was just telling my students last week at FSU, man, Florida State here, said, you guys, sometimes, I told them this flat out, sometimes you guys don't realize what you have. You don't really realize what you have. You have a direct connection to the Frank Fosters, the Miles Davises through me, because those people are gone now, but the people that I've known and still know knew them directly. So I can give you a direct answer to a question you might have musically, And so sometimes I realize how lucky I've been to know Wynton, who knew Dizzy. I knew Dizzy too, but who knew Miles, and to know Freddie Hubbard and all these people, and to my connection to Basie through the musicians in the orchestra who knew him and played with him. I mean, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, man.
And your students have a giant for a teacher, and I hope they appreciate that.
Well, I'm just fortunate. I love giving information to my students that I've gotten. I've been very fortunate to get information, like I said, from a lot of people, and I love giving it to them. I love seeing their eyes light up when they hear something. And what's really interesting is that up until a few years ago, in my office, I used to have a speakerphone, in my office, and whenever a student would have a question about something that I knew a jazz master could answer, I would just call them on the phone during the lesson. Like I did that with Clark Terry, Freddie Hubbard. And one student asked me one day about doodle tonguing. It's doodle, doodle, doodle. When you play kind of like that, it's called doodle tonguing. Well, Clark Terry was the master of that. So I said, well, I can answer the question. I tell you what, let me call Clark. So I put the phone on speaker. I called Clark. He happened to answer the phone. And I said, hey man, I got this student here. But Clark gave this student a private 30-minute trumpet lesson. I just sat back and listened. That's the kind of stuff I love doing. So now the information that they got it directly from a master. So I just love being this conduit, if you will, to make sure that they get the right information. And it's the same in any discipline. If you're in boxing, go take a lesson from George Foreman, who knew, Sugar Ray Robinson. Go take a lesson, if you're in classical music, take a lesson from somebody who may have known Bernstein or something. You have to go to the masters that have the information. And luckily for me, I can give this information to my students that will ensure at least they get it. Now, what they do with it, because my motto is this: I can show you where to look, but I can't tell you what to see. I can show you exactly where to look, but I can't tell you what you're going to see. And it's up to you to figure out how to take that and go with it. So anyway, I love teaching, man. I really do.
Your first professional small group jazz experience was working with legendary pianist Marcus Roberts, recording and touring with him. What was the most important thing that Marcus Roberts taught you as an artist?
To be thorough. Simply, really simple, man. To be thorough. And I remember before we left to go on tour, I called up Wynton and I said, hey man, I'm getting ready to go on the road with Marcus, because Marcus was with him for 6 years, So what should I do? What should I prepare for? What should I do? Give any advice? He told me 2 things. He said, first of all, I still laugh when I hear this. He said, first of all, make sure you pack a lot of underwear and socks. I said, okay, got it. And he said, the second thing, make sure you record yourself every night. Tape yourself every single night. So all of us in Marcus's band, we all had our little Walkmans on the floor or whatever we would record. So that's what I remember from him, is that being thorough. We'd have a concert and do a couple of sets and come off the bandstand and be in the dressing room, and he'd say something. Yeah, man, you missed that B7 chord. Oh, okay. It could be something that happened 3 hours ago. He would hear that. And so what that meant was that everything that we were playing, you've got to own this music. You just can't get up there and just coast and kind of think you can play. You got to know every single beat that's going on. This is why this music is so difficult, because you can't afford to put yourself on automatic pilot. And you've got to have the best. This jazz music requires musicians to have the best ears and reflexes of any of the genre of music that I know of. Because when I'm playing in front of a drummer, I have to know what his left foot is doing, what his right foot is doing, what his left hand is doing, what his right hand is doing. Same with the pianist, what his left hand, what chord he's playing, what voicing that is, what his right hand is doing, what the bass player is doing, all together in addition to what I'm trying to create. That's difficult to do, man. It's so difficult. So the key is to, at least at the beginning, when you're learning how to do it, try to develop a skill set that allows you to be thorough so you don't miss anything. That's why I have the job now. I guess I have as director of the Basie Orchestra, because when I hear them, I can tell if anybody's off. I can tell if something's out of tune. Then that's with 17 people. I can hear that immediately. And I think I developed that from working with Marcus, because he wouldn't allow us to skate by. Just like if you got a basketball coach and you got 2 or 3 players that consistently miss free throws, then you still let them start the game? No, man. Nope. Either they get in the gym and they shoot 1,000 free throws a day and get it right like Steph Curry, or you get off the team. That's how we were treated. That's how the elders treat us. They don't mess around, man. Even Freddie Hubbard told me, he said, man, back in the 50s and 60s, you'd be at a jam session in New York and you go to play, jam sessions are casual in the way they are now. But back then, man, he said, you go into a jam session and you miss a note on a chord. He said, man, people will talk about that all week. Remember that cat Sunday night, man, he missed that F7 chord on that bridge. He said they would talk like that. That's why they were great. That's why they, you listen to them now, listen to the recordings now, man, on 1 or 2 takes, they would nail this stuff. So I'm trying to pass this stuff to my students to be thorough, which is why I teach from the piano. So when we're playing a song and we're playing a chord like that, and my student plays this, that note's not in that chord. You hear that? So I'm able to show them, look, the note's not in the chord. This is a scale. This is a chord. Be thorough. Now, once you learn the rules, then you can break them. But if you haven't learned them yet, you haven't earned the right to play this music, as the great Woody Shaw said. You've got to earn the right to play this music. So, long answer to that question, that's what I learned from Marcus. You've got to earn the right to play this music. And that's mainly you have to master the fundamental. Before that, you got to master your instrument. And you got to master the fundamentals of harmony, of theory, of rhythm and time, being able to play with other people to negotiate how you fit within a group, and I just try to pass that on.
I've heard you say that small group jazz is spontaneous, intimate communication. What did you mean by that?
Well, when we get ready to play, we don't know what we're going to play. It's like, for example, a great analogy would be if you got 4 people together, and before the conversation begins, nobody knows what you're going to talk about, and then one person says Mercedes-Benz. So the rest of the group now has to figure out how to have a conversation about a Mercedes-Benz. We didn't say what year. We didn't say 1935 versus 2005. We didn't say that, but it might lead there. We didn't say diesel or gas. We didn't say one that's built for driving in Britain versus one that's versus driving in America. You know what I mean? So now all you have is Mercedes-Benz, and each person has to take guidance from the other people as to where that conversation is going. It could go off the rails at any minute, but it could be illuminating too, depending on the skill level of the people who know about a Mercedes-Benz. So that's kind of what jazz is like. When we start playing, I don't know what's going to happen. My only job, if I'm soloing or leading the group, I got to play the melody clear, and I got to play the melody in such a way to let the guys and the women know in the band, I know what I'm doing. And then when we get to the improvisational part of it, I mean, another analogy would be this, and I'll explain this to lectures that are mostly classical musicians. This is another great analogy too. Imagine this. Imagine Beethoven sitting at a grand piano. Right next to him is Bach at another grand piano. Across from Bach is Chopin at another grand piano. And right across from them is, Brahms at another grand piano. Now imagine all of them playing Happy Birthday. At the same time, nobody's saying a word. They're playing it at the same time. How do you think they're going to figure out how to negotiate to who's going to kind of lead it this way? They're going to have to listen. At certain points, Beethoven can kind of feel, okay, I can change that chord there, but Bach right next to him, I don't like that. So he may play something against it. Man. So as you see, the permutations, you just keep adding the levels of possibilities. It's mind-boggling. But it's the most incredible music when you see a jazz group live. That's what you're getting. They don't know what they're going to play until they play it right for you at that second. This is why it's never the same. Never. That's why I can't get enough records, man. I got thousands. I can't get enough because if I hear one version of one song by Miles, well, I want to see what Basie did with the same song. I want to see what John Coltrane did with the same song. I want to see what Ella Fitzgerald did or Sinatra did with the same song. Man, that's endlessly fascinating to me. Endlessly fascinating. And you never get enough of it. Yes.
So then, how did working in a small group prepare you for playing in a big band?
Oh, well, the small group, what happened with that is being thorough again. In a small group, I can play 7, 8, 9, 10 courses of a tune. But in a big band, I might get one. So I've got to know exactly what those chords are to make my statement in that one course. That's what allowed me to play in a big band. You can kind of learn how to become a soloist in a big band first, then go to small group, but it's really better the other way around. You can work out what you really like to do in a small group. So when you get to a big band, you simply just play your best refinement of whatever you like to play. That's kind of what how I look at it. So when I got to Basie, and my first solo, my first night in the orchestra was Corner Pocket. That's one chorus for me. I get to go through that cycle one time. So that means I got to know what those chord changes are from the first measure to the bridge to the end. I got to know what I'm doing. And I got to try to tell a story because I'm not going to get that same song. We might not play that song again for the rest of the week. So I got to make it count.
Do you still occasionally do concerts with a quartet and a sextet?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As often as I can. Absolutely. Yes, I sure do. Because I love both. I love playing both ways. I love playing in a small group, especially if you got the right musicians. Well, a big band too, you got to have the right people. But in a small group, one of the things I love about it most is that if I have a really great band, I can try things, and I love doing that. I love, like, for example, one of the things I like to try to do is incorporate something that Wynton did in his first band. One of the things that I heard, I think he told me this, or Marcus told me, maybe he told me this. And when I listened to his first band play, I said, man, that drummer, man, he's like, wow, man, this guy is incredible. So Wynton only gave him one set of instructions, only one set. And you know what he told him? Try to make me mess up. What that did to the drummer, that freed him. Now, really try to make you mess up? Okay, I'm gonna do that, but I still have the responsibility of keeping the form. But I'm gonna give you things that you're not gonna expect, and that gave a spark to that group that no other group at that time had. And the only groups that had it previous to that were groups by Miles Davis, with Tony Williams, John Coltrane, with Elvin Jones. Very few groups had that. So when I'm playing in my small group, each individual person, if they've really studied the music enough, we can go a ton of different ways, man, when we play. We can speed up things, slow things down. I'm talking about on the same tune. Gradually speed up, gradually slow down. Gradually play chords that I don't expect. And then when I hear something I'm not expecting, I've got to instinctively figure out in a split second, am I going to respond to that or am I going to play something else? So that's why playing in a small group, you got to have the best reflexes and you have to be able to think quick. It's like a game of basketball. When they're running on a fast break, you kind of almost figure out within a second who might get the ball, and that person that you're looking at that's going straight around to get ready to dunk, he might not get the ball. You know what I mean? It's the same thing in jazz. You're expecting something to happen. It's like, oh, I thought he was going to do that. Oh, I see, So this music is a thinking person's music, man, which is why, not to say that kids don't think, which is why we don't have any child prodigies in jazz. We don't have any child prodigies in this music. 3 and 4-year-old kids that can play Bach and Beethoven and Mozart. We don't have the equivalent of that in jazz.
It takes too long and it takes a certain maturity. Have you, Scotty, ever come across the perfect definition of swing?
Ooh-wee. Well, right when you said that, man, Count Basie Orchestra. I mean, Miles Davis's group with Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter and Tony Williams, John Coltrane on Resolution and Love Supreme. I mean, the Oscar Peterson Trio. I mean, Ray Brown on the bass. Oh my God.
So it strikes me that swing has a musical lilt or a groove that doesn't exist if you just play the straight melody. Am I right?
Exactly right. And I'll give you a perfect example. Like if I play a bass line, like what's a tune? If I play the blues, like, let me see. Any classical musician or any musician in the world can play that. That's not swinging at all. I'm just playing dang, dang, dang. But in jazz, the rhythm is based off on the triplet feel. You gotta incorporate the triplet. Da 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 da. And the bass player in particular has to figure out how to use that triplet without playing 3 notes every beat, but on the end of the triplet. Da 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 da. So now, with that in mind, I play the same bass line. It may sound like this. little lit, kind of lilt in there. And when that's happening, man, it's no greatest feeling in the world. You got a drummer right there, and the pianist coming, and bop, bop. Oh my God. But to me, that's what swing is. I just point out musicians, Lester Young, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie. Oh my God. The rhythms that he's playing.
While you're talking about all these big names, let me ask you about Count Basie. He passed away in 1984. Did you ever get to meet him?
No, I saw the orchestra twice. The first time I was in high school, I was in ninth grade. I think they came to a high school not far from where I lived. I sat in the front row and I watched the band, but I didn't go backstage or anything to meet him after that. I was just so overwhelmed by what I just heard. But the next time that I saw the band, 2 or 3 years later in the summer of 1982, after the concert was over, I went across the street to wait for my parents to pick me up. And it was at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, and it's on Peachtree Street, which is a main street through downtown Atlanta. And I'm standing across the street from the theater looking for my parents, for our car so I can go home, So as I'm waiting, I noticed the entire orchestra crossing the street. They were in a crosswalk, all of them crossing the street. I'm like, man, that's the band, So I'm standing there and they all started walking towards me down the sidewalk. I didn't know I was standing right in front of the front door to their hotel. They were staying in the hotel behind me. I didn't know. And I'm just standing there. So the whole band, they had on the brown 3-piece band suits, man, and trombones. I saw Freddie Green with the guitar, and Sonny Cohn was one of the trumpet players I remember seeing, because I remember he came down front to take a solo, and I, memorized what he looked like. And so I see him. So I spoke to him. I said, "Hey, how you doing?" I must have said I'm a trumpet player or something, because the next thing I know, man, he says, "Come on inside and have dinner with me. Come on inside. I'm about to have dinner, right? Come on." I was like, "Okay." I forget all about my parents, right? So I go inside. I'm sitting at this table with Sonny Cohn right on the front window by the street. And so he and I are talking, and I see my mom and dad finally start going up and down. They can't find me, right? So when they get close, I kind of wave, and they see me, and they pull over, put the hazards on, and just wait. That's how great my parents were, man. They knew that obviously I was doing something important. They sat right there and just waited until I was done. So I'm talking to Sonny Cohn, a guy at that time had been in the orchestra 20 years, and he ultimately ended up there 30 years. So I remember sitting across from him, and I could see he had been around the world 300 times. Seriously, man. He was Basie's road manager, confidant, all of that. So what happened after we talked trumpet stuff and all that, he said, "Well, come back in the morning and meet Mr. Basie, because we're going to leave the hotel at 10. They were going to Memphis, Tennessee, or wherever they were going. Come back at 9:30 and you can meet Basie before we leave." I said, "Okay." So I go back the next morning, but that was the same morning that I had an audition to play the national anthem for the Atlanta Braves, the baseball team, right? So I get there at 9:30, and I'm sitting at this table with Freddie Green. He told me to bring my trumpet. I had my trumpet there, my little album full of my little awards that I'd won in high school, all this kind of stuff, And so just sitting there thumbing through my book, and Sonny's holding my trumpet and playing, and the guys in the band are milling around outside, waiting on the bus, just kind of checking out of the hotel. But Mr. Basie was in his room. He was still upstairs in his room. And I never got a chance to meet him because I had to leave before they left, So, but I feel like I've had strange dreams and stuff, man. I'm telling you, man, this universe, whatever we call this life, I've had stuff that is mind-boggling. But it was just showing me what my path was as it relates to him. So it's really now that I look at it now, it's no accident that I'm doing what I'm doing.
It's absolutely no accident. It was your destiny. Yeah. Now, Scotty, my first introduction to Count Basie as a child was in 1966, listening to his live album with Frank Sinatra in Las Vegas. I never heard anything like that before, and it's still one of my favorite Count Basie albums. So I'm just wondering, do you have a favorite Count Basie album?
You know what? Probably Chairman of the Board. I mean, I love that Sinatra one, but one of the first ones that I heard, the first two, I have two of them. One of them is Chairman of the Board, 1959, because when I first heard that album, I was at the home of my dad, of a great aunt of mine, my father's aunt. I was at her home, and it was a family reunion, so we all kind of hanging out in the house. And she had an album collection, so I just go over to naturally, I'm a musician, I gravitate to the albums. I'm just looking through, and I see this thing that says Count Basie, and I had kind of heard the name. So I put it on the turntable, and just start. I didn't even ask her. I just put it on, start playing it. And I'm like, man, that's the same music I hear in church. It sounds like a gospel choir to me, really. And that's what the big band is an extension of the gospel choir. That's all it is. It's just more sophisticated. So growing up hearing gospel music every month from the time I was an infant, that's the same thing. It's the same thing I hear. So I could find the groove right away. I could hear what they were doing right away. And then the second album was an album called On the Road, 1979. So those two albums are 20 years apart, but they really encapsulate what I think is the true essence of Basie, of his deep swing, his precision. And as the band got older, it got looser, but the feel got heavier. It just got things just started to stretch just a little bit. Now the orchestra in 1979, instead of playing a note on the and of four, like 1, 2, 3, 4, pop, instead of doing that, now they'll move it a little bit and put it on beat one of the following bars. So now it's 1, 2, 3, 4, pop. That same note moved just a hair. So those things is what those two albums, I think, show the difference in how Basie kept evolving. He just kept evolving. He kept refining the swing.
I must say that the albums he did with Ella Fitzgerald, like Ella and Basie, A Classic Pair, A Perfect Match, these were brilliant collaborations.
Yeah, and a lot of them, one of them was live. Yeah.
A lot of people today may not realize that Count Basie ventured into an incredibly diverse catalog of music. For example, he made 2 albums of Beatles songs entitled Basie's Beatle Bag and Basie on the Beatles. What do you think of those albums?
They're great, man. He was, again, just kind of like what we just did with this blues record. He was listening to what was going on around him, what people liked, and he just tried to give them his version of what they were liking already. That's all he was doing. He was really paying attention to people.
The thing about him, for me, when he collaborated with a vocalist, is that he had a way of making every vocalist sound better. For example, there's an album he did with Nat King Cole from 1959 called Welcome to the Club.
Yep.
He made Nat King Cole sound better than he ever did.
He did, man. And what's the key to that? One of the keys that we can't forget are the arrangers, the guys that wrote that music. That's the real key, because the band plays how it plays, but an arranger like Frank Foster or Quincy Jones or Ernie Wilkins or any other number of musicians that arranged for him, they knew how to frame the band around the vocalist. That's really the key, because Basie didn't accept every arrangement. I tell people this all the time when I'm giving lectures on the band. Anytime somebody bought him a new chart to play, he just didn't go play it and put it in the book and say thank you. He would go through that arrangement from the beginning to the end to see if it worked for him. And if it worked for him, then fine, he could play, we play it. So the arrangers were key. They understood the singer they were writing for, and they understood how the band best played behind the singer. Quincy Jones is a prime example. Frank Foster is another one. They knew when to have the band play, when not to have them play. So I'm in the middle of an arrangement right now that I'm writing for a vocalist, Vanessa Rubin, but I'm writing it with the Count Basie Orchestra in mind. I'm not writing it for somebody. I'm writing how we play, because once another band gets it, they're gonna swing it. So the arrangers, man, they are the key. And Basie was talk about a great editor. I heard stories that he would take out entire sections. Like if the arrangement was letter A, letter B, letter C, letter D, letter whatever like that. If he didn't like letter F, he would just take it out. Just we're not playing that, and put everything else back together. So the arrangers, led by Basie, was what really was key, and the vocalists like Sinatra, Ella, Sarah, man, they loved that, because they knew if we got to play with the Basie Orchestra, they're going to be swinging. I'm not going to have anything to worry about. The orchestra's not going to kill me. They'll know when to play, when not to play.
I don't know if you remember this, because I'm a lot older than you, but in the early 60s, Judy Garland had a TV show. Count Basie and his orchestra appeared on her show. It was unforgettable. I've always thought Judy should have done an entire album with him. Don't you think?
Oh man, that would have been great. And what's funny? They probably did. There's still a lot of stuff that's coming out that we didn't know about. It's still a lot of stuff that's coming out that had been sitting in a vault somewhere that nobody knows. So maybe they did. I'd be surprised if they didn't, because I do have that footage of her singing "Strike Up the Band" with the band on her show and all of that. I've seen that many times. Same thing with Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire had a TV show that the band was on. I was just showing that to my girlfriend the other day in the car on YouTube. He's tap dancing in front, dancing in front of the band. So I would imagine, man, I bet you if you took a good look at some of those vaults from NBC or CBS, all these places, you may find stuff like that. And because it was just an easy thing to do. All they had to do was book a session for a day and just go in there and record.
Wow.
So I bet you they probably did. They just probably didn't release it or something or whatever. So
that would be something. Now, I've
would
heard
be.
you say, Scotty, that being a jazz musician is a lifelong process. What
Oh
did
yeah,
you mean by that?
you never stop learning. I never stop learning. I never stop listening. It's a lifelong thing till my last breath, man, because I want to get better and better. I want to get my ear stronger and stronger. I want to get my reflexes better, my technique on my instrument better and better. So the human body, you know, when I don't play for a while, the trumpet, my muscles go back to the natural state like any other person. So I have to go back and warm up again and keep things going. So we always are in the process of keeping things going. When you don't use your mind, it goes dormant. When you don't use your skills, the piano, whatever it is, the things that you know, they kind of get a little softer, you know? So for me, I understood a long time ago, this is a lifelong thing, man. And as a result of that, it kind of made me have more patience. So when I'm working on something now, I know some stuff I'm not going to get this right away. It's going to take me a minute. And I'm teaching my students the same thing. You know, this is not a microwavable type of a process where you put it in the microwave, 10 seconds, bam, ready to go. No, this is a long simmering oven kind of a heat. Where you
Well,
just
all right, then let's talk about your long simmering oven. You finally released your first solo album in 2009. So the obvious question, what took you so long to take center stage in the recording studio?
Man, I didn't have time, man. I was on the road with the orchestra, man, 40 weeks a year. That's what it was. I just didn't have time, you know? And finally, what happened was we had a vocalist by the name of Jamie Davis, great vocalist who was with us. And when he left us, he was on his solo, doing a solo thing, and he wanted to do his first solo album using us, using the Basie Orchestra. So we agreed to do that. We were in the studio playing. So my playing on that album impressed the people that own the record label. And they asked me, they said, hey, you ever thought about having a solo? You know, I said, man, I was on that track before I even joined the band, before I even joined the orchestra. I had a manager and I was opening for Wynton Marsalis and Dave Brubeck with my own quartet. So we were on that track to get a recording contract. We were working on that, actively working on it. But I couldn't turn the orchestra down. I knew that was my, you know. So now I'm in the orchestra, so I had to put my solo thing on hold. So when they said that, I said, okay, now, yeah, let me go ahead and, yeah. Because I told them, I said, I've been planning it for years. I had already had musicians all set up, Wynton, Clark Terry. And when I told them, they said, well, you got what? Yeah, of course, man. I've just been waiting for the right time to do it, you know? So that's how that happened.
Well, and let's talk about the new album, the Count Basie Orchestra Swings the Blues. Where did the inspiration for this album come from?
Man, in 2019, Count Basie was finally inducted into the International Blues Hall of Fame in Memphis, Tennessee. So I was invited to go to accept the award on his behalf and just give a simple thank you speech, you know. So I went there and I did that. But while I was there, the president of the Blues Foundation, or what somebody said, came to me and said, would you mind being a presenter for our Blues Awards? Because that was going on at the same time. The Blues Awards are like the Grammys, but for the blues, right? So I said, sure, I don't mind being a presenter. They said, all you got to do is read the teleprompter and say the person's name that wins. They come up on the stage, give them the award. No problem. So I did that. And when I was done, I went back to my table. I was sitting at this big round table with about maybe 10 other people. And the guy sitting next to me was Bobby Rush, the great blues, you know, vocalist who's 89 now, you know. And so as I'm sitting there with him, then I remember seeing Muddy Waters' son and Bernard Purdy and all of these people. I thought, man, we need to record with these people. This needs to be our next album. Because then I thought, wait a minute. And I thought for a minute that the orchestra basically had already done something like that. And I thought, you know what?
Well,
nobody is doing anything like that.
Well, he did venture into the blues a few times. In 1959, in an album called Every Day I Have the Blues with Joe Williams.
Yep.
And then again with Joe Williams in 1960 with an album called Just the Blues. Didn't he do an album in 1970 called Good Time Blues?
Yeah, but that's different though. Those are modern blueses. That's not those albums were not based on the Delta blues. Right. Son House, Muddy Waters, Charlie Patton, that kind of thing. Those were more modern blues, just like I've just played for you now. 12-bar blueses. That's what those albums are based on, the typical 12-bar modern blues, not blueses that were done in 1920. It wasn't based on that. The 8-bar blues or the 9-bar blues. That's the difference. That's what the Delta musicians were doing. Plus, there's no electric guitar on any of those records. That's the key. The electric guitar is the staple of the Delta blues sound. So you can't do and call it like a Delta blues record or an authentic blues record, and you don't have electric guitar. So if you don't have electric guitar, that's fine, but that's more modern. See what I mean? That's more what Charlie Parker would have played. So that was the difference. He hadn't recorded anything like that. And I'm thinking he had not recorded with Muddy Waters. He hadn't recorded with B.B. King that I know of. He hadn't recorded with, Bobby Blue Bland or Son House, or Lead Belly, any of those, Coco Taylor. He recorded with Ella and Sarah, but he didn't record with Coco Taylor. That's a straight up blues vocalist. So that was the difference. And I thought, for example, I said, maybe he did, or maybe somebody did, but nobody had, man. And the person that would have put something like that together would have been Quincy. So I thought, and I kept looking, nope, there was nothing like it. I'm like, okay, this is what we got to do. But I got to get the right people, and it has to have the right sound. So I had to start researching, man. So I got a budget, and I started buying every blues history book I could find, every blues recording that I knew was important, like the complete Charlie Parton recordings, the complete Son House, the complete Lead Belly, the complete, just on and on and on and on, just immersing myself in the sound of it. Then I flew over to Mississippi, and my girlfriend and I literally drove through the Delta, man. We spent a few days just driving, looking at these areas, finding the original Highway 61, the original Highway 49, finding the crossroads where Robert Johnson purportedly did what he, sold his soul to the devil. We went and we spent time at Morgan Freeman's Blues Club, Ground Zero. We went to a lot of other blues clubs, little shacks and stuff so I immersed myself in as much of it as I could to try to understand what was going on. But in the meantime, I'm studying the recordings. I'm really listening to see, okay, how can we make this work? How can we, and so then I listened to probably 500 or 600 songs and went through each one of them to figure out what would be best. I had to narrow 500 or 600 down to 12 or 15 to see what would be best to represent what we're trying to do and get the right artist and make the song, make sure it's right for them. Like with Shamika Copeland, she had to do I'm a Woman. Coco Taylor said I'm a Woman. That had to be in there. Let me give that to Shamika. We had to have Bobby Rush sing, something. So I went through his catalog. What's best, So the sound with the electric guitar, that's the difference between those records that Joe Williams did and what we just did. There's no other recording other than George Benson playing electric jazz guitar that Basie made with an electric guitar. Now, a week ago, I just saw a photo of Mr. Basie with Rosetta Tharpe, but it was a photo. So I haven't heard that recording, if it exists, if they made a recording. It was a photo. They may have done a concert or something together. But again, in Mr. Basie's catalog, there's no precedent for what we did.
Well, that's really important for music fans to understand, and I'm really glad you clarified it. Were all the vocalists in the same studio as the orchestra when you recorded the songs?
Everybody, see, Bobby Rush was there, Lauren Mitchell was there, Carmen Bradford was there, Mr. Sipp. Everybody else overdubbed their part onto the orchestra. We couldn't get everybody in because it was 10 people or however many there were. Couldn't get everybody to agree on the date. And because everybody had to kind of revolve their schedule around us, because the orchestra, when we moved the orchestra, that's a lot of money so wherever we're going to be somewhere for in a major city for 4 or 5 days, that's the best time to record. So we were in LA to play the Hollywood Bowl, figured that's the perfect time. We just extend our stay by a day or so. And that's how they made it work. So we got everybody who could come to LA, we brought them in. And the ones that couldn't get there, Shamika Copeland couldn't get there. Oledisi was in the studio with us also. So I say half of the musicians was there. And the other half, they had the track and they just overdubbed their tracks later.
Now, you wrote an instrumental number called the Count Basie Shuffle, which I love. What inspired you to write that song, Scotty?
Well, simple, man. I wondered out loud, what would have happened if Basie and Charlie Patton had played together? What if Charlie Patton was walking down the street one night somewhere in some city somewhere and heard the Basie Orchestra coming through the sound, and he had his guitar and he walked in and Basie waved him, come over and play. What kind of sound would that have been? What kind of vibe would that have been, man? So the first thing, obviously, it would have been a blues, and it would have probably been something medium, And then the second thing I knew was that whenever he would start soloing, Patton that is, on the guitar, the saxophones and the trombones and the trumpets would improvise riffs behind them. I knew those things would happen. So that's what I had to create. So it wasn't really too difficult. I just had to kind of think about what are some riffs that the saxophones would play, what are some riffs that the trombones would play, what are riffs that we play. And for example, one of the riffs that I wrote into the chart is a riff that I took directly from Sweets Edison. He was one of the greatest blues jazz trumpet players, jazz blues or blues jazz, however you want to call it, in the history of music. He had a way of playing the blues that was just ridiculous. And his favorite lick, at least to me, that he played a lot over his career, I put that directly into the trumpet section. And then I had the saxes and then I had the bones. So that's kind of how I went about writing it. And I just imagined this club scene with Charlie Patton standing in front of the orchestra and then the orchestra just playing these riffs behind him, Basie at the piano smiling. So that was in my mind as I wrote it. I just had to find a good key. I put it in G, you know, and just went to town with it. I think we had a good time. And at the end of the day, I still wanted to make sure that when you put that on, you want to dance, you want to move, you want to snap your fingers or something. You just can't sit still because I'm sure the people, had there been that collaboration, they would have been on the floor dancing. That's what they would have been doing. You know?
That's just a great number. And one of the most beautiful numbers on the album is Carmen Bradford's version of Just for a Thrill. Now, she actually sang with Count Basie himself, didn't she?
Yeah. She was the last vocalist that Mr. Basie hired in 1983. So she was the last vocalist that he hired before he passed away. And she worked with him for about a year. But yeah, so, you know, she's our regular vocalist pretty much when she can be on the road with us. She has a great solo career and she teaches and all that stuff too. But whenever we're doing major tours, she's with us. And I wanted to find something for her. And that composition that we had been doing with her, Just for a Thrill, had already been in our book. So we actually didn't need to find anything new for her. That we just knew, oh, that'll fit perfectly. That's what we need. The tempo was right. So I think we did it in one take.
Wow. Now, how many members of the Count Basie Orchestra today actually played with Count Basie himself?
It would be Clarence Banks and Carmen Bradford, just two now. Wow. Clarence Banks, our trombonist. He's a senior member. He's been there 38 years. Yeah, 38 years, yeah. Or 39 years, I'm sorry, 39. He joined in 84, just before Basie passed away. So he's been there 39 years. Carmen has been there 40 years.
So, Scotty, as director of the Count Basie Orchestra, which is by far considered to be the greatest jazz orchestra in the world, do you feel enormous pressure to maintain that super high standard in every performance?
I mean, I don't feel pressure, so to speak. I just know what the job is. My main focus, number one, you gotta have the right people. And I've always felt comfortable that I have the right people. We've always had the right people. So the only thing that sometimes I feel pressure is when somebody has to leave or I have to let somebody go, is that chair, that spot has, who's ever going to come in, it has to be the right person. They have to know and understand what this orchestra is about. They have to know the homework that they have to do. They have to know who's the people that have sat in that chair. For example, let's pick a chair like, say, lead trombone. If I had to get a new lead trombonist, they have to know, well, who was the lead trombonist before that, before they get there? Who's the one before that? Who's the one before that? What did they do from 1935? You know, who were the guys and what did they do? You know, how did they, lead alto is another great example. You know, Marshall Royal played lead alto in the Basie Orchestra for 20-something years, over 20 years. After he left, Bobby Plater came in and began to play lead, but he shifted that lead, the way he played it just a hair. He bent the notes just a little different, but it stayed with the band as he was on lead for about a good 10 years, maybe a little bit more than that. And then when he left on lead, what Bobby had taken from Marshall and extended a hair, Danny Turner came in, who was there when I first got there, and took what Marshall and Bobby had done, and he began to twist it just a little bit, but within the framework of what Basie loved to have in his band and what those guys had done before him. So see what I mean? Yeah. So is having the right personnel is key. The music then will take care of itself. If you got the right people, then it's just a matter of me making sure that we play the right things the right way. Like, for example, there are certain songs that we play, we don't play the same way they played it in 1938. When we listen to 1 O'Clock Jump now, it doesn't sound how it sounded in 1938. Same chart, but it's evolved over the years. I just have to make sure that it maintains the integrity of the tune. The tempo is close.
You know, when I heard Mr. Basie in an interview many years ago, he used to say that a happy band is a great band.
That's right.
How do you keep an atmosphere of fun in the band?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about that is that the guys have to know or have to understand that I know what I'm doing. That makes them comfortable. Because if they had a leader that really didn't know the chart and really was kind of second guessing tempos and not knowing what the trumpet should be. So for me, that's the first thing that I think that allows for the band to be happy, is that their leader, they have the utmost confidence in me. That's first and foremost. So I know that they do because I know what I'm doing. I've worked a lot of years to get to to know what I'm doing. Then the second thing is I treat them as human beings first, not musicians first. They're human, man. So they, how's your family doing? What's your son doing up in softball, or your daughter doing in softball this year? I remember asking somebody that. Or how's your daughter? She made straight A's. Give her $100 from me. So I make sure that there's a human connection first, because then if there's anything that you're gonna get in music, anything to get in music, you're gonna get it. So I treat them, hey, we go out to dinner together. I mean, we don't hang together all the time, 24/7, but I treat them as people, and as a result, we become family. We laugh together. We get upset at things together. We support one another in what they do off the bandstand. It's not just about getting on the bandstand. The camaraderie off the bandstand is what makes it good on the bandstand. When we're on the buses and planes and just traveling through the hotels and stuff, man, we have so much fun. I was telling somebody not long ago, you have not had fun until you've been on tour with the Count Basie Orchestra. Now that's fun. We're dead serious about what we do, but the fun that we had, oh my, you kidding me, man? The jokes and the laughter and the stories that literally go back to the 30s. There's stories that we still tell for the new guys when they come in about stuff that happened in the 50s and the 40s that have been passed on. Things that have guys in the band sleepwalking on the bus, just all kinds of stuff, man. So we have fun. So when we get to the bandstand, I don't have to worry about trying to pull something out of them. It's there. They want to play for you. And I think from studying Mr. Basie and the previous leaders before me, Thad Jones and others, one thing I've learned as a leader, you have to make each person feel like they are contributing to the overall success of whatever it is you're trying to do. Everybody. I don't care if they play fourth trumpet or if they play whatever. You have to make sure everybody feels that they're important, which is why everybody in the band is a soloist, man. We don't have any stars in the Count Basie Orchestra. The band itself is the star. And so everybody feels a part of that. So one night you see the band, say if you saw us on a Tuesday night, you might see, everybody's going to get a solo, but it may be one or two people that may get 2 or 3 maybe, depending on the set list. But that next night, it won't be like that. Those people that didn't get to 2 or 3 the night before, they're going to get the solo feature tonight. You know what I mean? And the next night after that. So everybody is always on their toes and anxious to see the set list to see if they're going to be featured that particular night. Mm-hmm.
I mentioned in my introduction a number of music superstars that you've either recorded with or performed with over the years. Is there anybody living or dead that you haven't worked with, but you would have liked to?
Oh, man. Miles, Nat King Cole.
Oh,
I would have loved to arrange for Nat King Cole, wrote some music for him, or just played with him in his band. Of course, Charlie Parker, that would have been. And Duke Ellington, I never met Duke. I played in the Duke Ellington Orchestra on tour a couple of times, but I would have loved to work with Duke. Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, I never got a chance to work with. She's my favorite vocalist of all time. Sarah Vaughan is. I would have loved to work with Sarah Vaughan. There are quite a few, man. And but those are the 3 or 4 that I can think of right off the top of my head,
Well, if you could play your new album for Mr. Basie,
mm-hmm.
what do you think he would say?
I think he'd be smart. I think he'd say, great, man. Swell or fantastic. I think he would really, really love it. And because he's hearing all of these musicians, man, because the good thing about my job is that when I call somebody and ask them for something or to do or to join us, it's always a yes. It's never, well, let me take it. No, it's an immediate yes. So that's a good positive thing about being the director of the Count Basie Orchestra, because it's still Mr. Basie's orchestra. It's not mine. I'm just here to keep it going as long as I can. It's not my orchestra. And when I leave, somebody else is gonna come along and direct it, but it still has Mr. Basie's name on it. And as long as Mr. Basie's name on it, it belongs to him and what his vision was. As long as you do have great leaders, we just have to understand what his vision was. Keep refining it, keep things sharp, keep it swinging, keep people wanting to dance to it. Ultimately, if they don't want to dance to it, no longer Count Basie Orchestra.
Well, and there's that superb, high quality musicianship that always comes through. So, Scotty, we all know that jazz is a distinctly American genre of music that came out of the social conditions that have existed throughout American history. So, in your opinion, how much of learning about jazz music is also learning about American history?
Oh, it's the same. It's intertwined. You know, I tell my students all the time, just again, I keep going back to my students. Just a week ago, I gave my trumpet studio a quiz, and all of them flunked the quiz. So then I said, how many of you guys read history books or jazz history books or American history books about where you live? And not many of them could raise their hand. And I tried to explain to them, you've got to understand the history of this music. You've got to understand it. That'll help you to understand what happened so you can see how to kind of move these things forward. If you never understand it or never even are interested in understanding it, you're going to lose it. So the American history, so when I'm working on something, whether it be an arrangement or something, or especially if I'm working with students, I try to give them a historical perspective on how it is I arrived at. What I'm trying to say is that I operate with basically using history as my foundation. That's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and that's the impression that I have when I've listened to you in other interviews. It's very much a historical perspective. I really hope that your students understand the history and the roots of the music that you are teaching them.
I try to do the best I can, man. And you know, I think our educational system in America, for some reason, for whatever, over the last 30 to 40 years, is different. When I was in school, we had to learn about all of these things. I mean, they took us to the symphony. They took us to museums. That was an annual 2 or 3 time field trip every single year, no matter what grade you were in. You knew you were going to the symphony. Whether you liked it or not, you were going to sit right there and listen to the symphony. Whether you liked the planetarium or not, you're going to sit right there and look up at the stars. That was automatic. And whether you liked it or not, you're going to go to the concert that the school band is giving. That's just how it used to be, man. I don't think it's like that anymore. They're taking all of this funding out of public schools for whatever reason, but the arts, you know, which is the soul of this country, is just getting gutted, which is why you look around now and you see what we have. People glorifying violence, glorifying talking to women, calling women any kind of, you know, that's a result of what they've been taking out of the schools. So for me, regardless of that, I still try to give my students the truth, the right books to read, the things to understand for their kids, you know, because I always tell them one day, each one of you is going to be in the role of a teacher. You're going to have somebody to come to you to learn something. And if you don't have anything you could tell them and show them how to go back to your teacher before you, their teacher before me. I talk about my teachers all the time, man. They made sure, like, for example, I probably wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for my high school band director, the late Gordon Boykin, because one day he walked straight up to me and looked me right in my eye and said, you know, Count Basie is in town tonight and you're going to see him. He walked off. He didn't come up to me and say, you ever heard of Count Basie? Well, no, he said, Count Basie's in town tonight, you're going to see him. He walked off. I said, okay, look what happened. Because he knew telling his student to go see something that was historic, that was great, could possibly, just possibly, have an effect on him. And look what it did to me.
Oh, my Lord.
That's education, man.
I want to tell our viewers that you can learn more about Scotty Barnhart, buy his music, and see his tour schedule by going to his official website, scottybarnhart.com. You can also go to the official website for the Count Basie Orchestra by going to thecountbasieorchestra.com. Well, Scotty, I was looking at your website and I see that you offer private trumpet lessons. How do you have the time?
Yeah. Well, I usually have Mondays and Fridays reserved for my private students. And I just, if somebody calls me or gets in touch and wants to do it, we just schedule it. I try to find a time of the day or the week that can do it. My teaching schedule at FSU, I'm part-time, which allows me still to travel. So I cram all of my students in Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And there's more than enough time to do that. But I leave my private and my weekends open for private students usually. So it works out. You know, I have one tonight at 7 o'clock, I think. And he's a gentleman that's in South Carolina somewhere. So we do it via Zoom. And I can hear him play. I give him things to work on, and we just meet, you know, once every other week or something like that. So it works. It's a lot of work, but I love doing what I do. It's not work. I just love, you know, hearing people giving some information that I've gotten and watch them take it and just run with it on the trumpet or jazz piano. I'll teach jazz piano too. So, you know, I love doing it. I find time for it.
Well, I've got to tell you, your enthusiasm, your love for what you do, for the music that you play, for the legacy of Count Basie is absolutely contagious. It's been an immense honor having you on our show. Thank you so much for everything you're doing to keep the magnificent legacy of Count Basie's music alive. Thank you for this beautiful new album. And thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for taking the time to appear on our show, Scotty.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Harvey. I really appreciate it. Anytime, man. Anytime.
Our guest has been jazz trumpeter extraordinaire Scotty Barnhart, director of the Count Basie Orchestra, whose new album entitled The Count Basie Orchestra Swings the Blues is now available on Amazon and wherever you buy music and on every major music streaming service. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my director of programming, Deborah Batsafin, my production assistant, Rosa Puzo, my PR director, Laurie Towers, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.